My daughter is showing signs of recovery, so I'm writing this as a memorial. I know this may sound disgusting, but in lieu of penance, I would like someone to hear it. Let me start with the specifications of me and my family. I am 27 years old, part-time worker. My husband, 27 years old, a construction worker. My daughter, 11 years old, elementary school student. My husband and I went to high school together, and we went to what is called an lower-level high school, which does not have a high deviation score. My husband and I used to be irrepressible delinquents, bullying, shoplifting, smoking. We did all the things that are called delinquent. I've been arrested by the police and given a stern warning more than once. It's probably a wonder I don't have a criminal record. We were the type of person who were always said we are the best in our hometown. Now it is an embarrassing memory. I started dating my husband right after I entered high school, and as you can imagine, we didn't use proper contraception, so I became pregnant and gave birth to a daughter with him when I was 16 years old. Of course, there was no way I could continue school, and we both dropped out of high school. It's strange to me, but as soon as I found out I was pregnant, I had a strong feeling that I had done something stupid, and that I had to become a decent person for the sake of my daughter. I don't know if it was a revelation or an awakening of motherhood, but I felt strongly that I had to be reborn as a real human being. To be honest, my husband was against it at first. He said, "It's too early for us." But after much persuasion, he finally agreed. My husband was against it at first, but he has been working for our family since he dropped out of high school at 16, and I am very grateful to him for that. I guess a frog's offspring is a frog's offspring, and since we were like this, our parents were similar assholes, and we didn't have a family that we could rely on just because we had a baby. When I found out pregnant, I left home as if I was being evicted and began living in a shabby apartment that could be rented without a guarantor. The only job that my husband, a high school dropout, or rather a junior high school graduate, could get right away was a job in the field, and the salary was not very high. Perhaps the salary could be higher if he gained more experience and skills in field work, but my husband was still a quarrelsome person as he was when he was a student, and he would easily get into disputes with other workers on the same job site. So he has years of service as a field worker, but he is shuffled from company to company and field site to field site, and his salary is thin. So life is pretty tough. So I also started working part-time right after I gave birth to support the family. However, like my husband, I also dropped out so I could hardly find a job. After applying for many jobs, I managed to find one, and now I work as a cashier at a supermarket during the day and night shift at a nursing home at night. It is physically demanding, but I worked hard to make ends meet and to pay for my daughter's future education. We wanted our daughter to go to college and get a good job at a solid place, since we ourselves struggled with being high school dropouts. Fortunately, our daughter was smart, not unlike us, and her grades in elementary school were very good, so we felt that we wanted her to go to a good school. Anyway, like this, I worked hard every day from the time my daughter was little. She is now 11 years old. I was busy, but I thought I had raised her with love in my own way. But she stopped going to school a few years ago. I didn't notice it because my daughter was a good, quiet girl at home, but at school she was a problem child who was quick to get into fights with her friends. The reasons and triggers for the fights were childish either way, but my daughter would respond with excessive violence. She was called to school many times, and each time she went to the teacher and her friends' parents to bow down to them. I couldn't understand why she would do such a thing, even though she is a quiet and good girl at home. I guess he inherited her father's temper, but it didn't go away, and as a result she was treated like a tumor by her classmates. Then one day she suddenly started saying, "I don't want to go to school." My husband's stance was it's okay if she doesn't want to go to school. But I wanted my daughter to go to school. I wanted to quit my job and be there for her, of course. But the reality was that I had to work to make ends meet. My daughter was no longer in a grade that allowed her to attend school, so I had no choice but to have her stay at home while I was working part-time. Of course I was worried. So I secretly set up a camera in the living room and used it to check on her from time to time while I was at work. The camera was a baby monitor that I received as a baby shower gift. It had a recording function and was a pretty good one. I had used it when she was a baby and hadn't used it for a long time, but I pulled it out and reused it. My daughter was usually in the living room playing games or studying when I wasn't around, and she never did anything dangerous in the kitchen or went out on her own, so as she got used to it, I gradually stopped checking the monitor. My husband also had a day off, so I could leave it to him on those days. I could leave it to my husband on his days off, but since it was physical labor, I mostly just slept at home. I was concerned about my daughter's truancy, but she is a good, bright girl at home, and she is making progress with her studies at home. I thought at the time that she would be able to go to school again when she entered junior high school in a few years and the environment would change. It's too late to regret it now, but I wonder if things would have turned out differently if I had quit my job and stayed close to my daughter, even if it meant becoming poor at that time. I still remember it. It was my first day off from work in a while, and I was trying to get some of the housework and cleaning done. I was in the middle of collecting all the trash cans in the house and putting them in one place when I accidentally knocked over the trash can from my daughter's room. Sighing, I was picking up the trash, one by one, when I felt something hard in my hand. It was a rolled-up tissue, but it felt like it had some kind of plastic or something wrapped inside. I always tell her not to put anything but burnable trash in here. Frustrated, I unfolded the tissue to sort it and was stunned. Inside was a used pregnancy test, and it was positive. Whose is it? My husband was cheating on me with his girlfriend? No, but would you normally use such a test at the home of a woman with whom you are having an affair? I thought about it a lot and came to a conclusion that I did not want that to be the case, so I called out to my daughter who was playing a game in the living room. "Hey, I found this in the trash in your room. Do you know what it is?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant, but I could almost hear my own heartbeat. I don't know. My daughter tried to cover it up, but when I saw her pale complexion, I knew it was all over. I was really shocked. I thought I had given birth at 16, which I thought was pretty early, but I didn't expect something like this to happen to my daughter, who was only 11 years old. My daughter seemed normal at home, even her sanitary napkins were running low every month, so I bought more. Looking back, I think she was faking it so she wouldn't find out she was pregnant. I don't know if it was an ordinary mistake or if I was upset when I threw the test strips in the trash. I heard the sound of my future plans for my daughter, who, unlike me, would go on to higher education and work for a decent company, come crashing down. Who is the father? Who is the father of the baby? Tell me. I questioned her sternly, but she wouldn't talk. I thought about it a lot, but I had no idea who the father of my daughter's baby was. She was not going to school, so there was no boyfriend or friendships to begin with. As I was pacing around the living room with my head in my hands, I suddenly remembered the baby monitor. I was lucky that I had a feature that allowed recordings to be transferred to my phone on their own, so I was able to go back to footage from quite a while ago. But there was nothing suspicious about it. What bothered me was that my husband's coworker had visited our home several times over the past few months. I had no idea that my husband's coworkers had visited while I was at work, so as soon as my husband got home, I questioned him about this. My husband was so furious that his face almost lit up when he heard that our daughter was pregnant, but this coworker said that he had nothing to do with our daughter's pregnancy. You said, deal with my daughter when I'm not around, but I don't really know how to deal with kids. So I invited my coworker, who said she often plays with her relatives' kids, over to my house. He's a good guy who hangs out with me a lot at work, and he would never touch my daughter. In the first place, there was absolutely no chance for my daughter and his coworker to have such a relationship, since the three of us spent all the time together in the living room. I was appalled by my husband, who said, I don't know how to deal with the kids, but when I thought about it, on my days off I just slept in to recover from my work. That is why he had hardly participated in housework or childcare. My husband's coworker seemed to visit our home often, and at first I suspected the coworker, but it certainly seemed unlikely that my daughter and the coworker would ever be alone together as long as my husband was around, so I ruled out the coworker as a possible father suspect. In the end, we did not know who the father was, but if left alone, the child in my daughter's belly would grow and grow and grow, and we would not be able to get her back. My husband and I kept trying to persuade our daughter to put the baby down, but she insisted that she was going to have the baby. My husband was so mad that he overrode my control and punched my daughter in the face, but she still refused to change her mind. I gave birth at 16 and had a very hard time, but you can't be a mother at 11. Put down while you're still a few weeks along. Then why didn't you put me down? Didn't people around you tell you to put me down? My daughter's words pierced my heart. It was true that when I became pregnant, my parents, teachers, and even my husband had tried to persuade me to have an abortion. Still, I did not break down and decided to give birth to my daughter. It was because I strongly felt that the new life inside me was very precious. I am just like you. I could not say anything when my daughter said this to me. Over the next 10 days, the time limit for my daughter to have an abortion was getting closer and closer, but the situation had not changed at all. Every day my husband and I tried to persuade her, but she would not budge. Was this the good girl she used to be? I was so skeptical. The atmosphere in the house was also very difficult. But I had to work part-time to make ends meet. I was just frustrated that nothing was getting better every day. Things changed drastically the day I went to work the night shift at a nursing home and came home early in the morning. I went home quietly, exhausted. In the living room, my husband was drunk and snoring on the couch. On the table was a bottle of liquor that looked very expensive, something you don't usually see. I remember being stunned at how carefree he was under such circumstances. I went to the front of my daughter's room and said, "I'm home." I wanted to at least say hello to her properly, and she responded to me, though she was still unfaithful to me. But only on that day there was no response. I called out to her several times, but she did not respond. "Are you still sleeping?" or angry? I'll open the door for now, okay. There was my daughter lying there, bleeding from her swollen face. I was already really panicking, but I managed to call an ambulance, knocked my husband up, and headed for the hospital. Fortunately, my daughter was not in critical condition, but she was unconscious. The hospital also called the police because it was a very serious incident. They said that my daughter had been beaten to death with some kind of hard stick. How could this happen? I was shivering in my daughter's hospital room when a police officer came to me. I am sorry, but we have to take your husband into custody because he is suspected of being a suspect. I was surprised, but it was understandable that the police would say so. Although my husband did not have a criminal record, he had often been cautioned by the police for getting into fights in the past. Although the murder weapon was still unknown, the police seemed to think that the husband had drunkenly beaten his daughter and then fallen asleep. Oh no! Yes, my husband has a tendency to lose his temper, but he would never beat my daughter to the point of unconsciousness. I appealed desperately, but the policeman's expression remained firm. That's right. A camera. There's a baby monitor in the living room. Again, I remembered the baby monitor. The baby monitor had remained in place even after I had found out I was pregnant with my daughter. I checked the recording of last night with the police officer, and there it was, my husband coming home in a good mood with a bottle of alcohol, my daughter passing by him after taking a bath and going to her room, my husband starting a dinner at the table, and eventually falling drunk to sleep, and me coming home. Thanks to the baby monitor, my alibi was proven and my husband was somehow exonerated. The police said they would continue their investigation, but with no idea who the culprit was and no sign of our daughter's consciousness, my husband and I spent a few days in the dark. About a week after my daughter was admitted to the hospital, a police officer came to our home and asked, "Do you recognize this man?" The police officer then showed me a surveillance camera installed in the bicycle parking lot of our apartment building. Unbeknownst to me, the surveillance camera showed the bicycle parking lot and, at one end, the window of my daughter's room. As I watched the video, I saw a man with what looked like a long iron pipe enter my daughter's room through the window and come out. This is my colleague. My husband looked pale and muttered to himself. We went back and checked the footage and found that the same man had been seen several times in the past going in and out of the window of her room. Now that we have confirmed the face, we will move on. With that, the police left, and a few days later, my husband's colleague was arrested. And as it turned out, this man was the father of my daughter's baby. My husband's coworker, after he was arrested, readily told them about his motive. It may have been more a list of bitter words than a statement, though. He used to beat and bully me on a daily basis. He thought it was just a prank or a tease, but it was painful every day. His daughter and I exchanged contact information when he invited me over to his house and he stood up to use the restroom. I wanted to play with her to make her feel bad about being bullied. I think she must have been lonely. I was a little nice to her and she immediately started listening to everything I said. After that, I started going to her room on my days off and other times when her parents were not around. It was exhilarating to think to him, "Behind your bullying me, I'm doing this to your daughter." When the police officer told me this story, I almost threw up. At the same time, I regretted not checking my daughter's phone. I assumed that if she didn't have any friends, she wouldn't need to look at her phone. The police officer asked me if I would stop now, but I asked him to tell me everything my colleague had stated. One day, she told me she was pregnant. I suddenly became afraid of what he would do to me if he found out about it. I told her repeatedly that she should have an abortion, but she wouldn't listen to me at all. I thought there was nothing I could do, so I decided to commit the crime. I gave him a bottle of expensive alcohol containing sleeping pills, and when he was asleep, I took the opportunity to commit the crime. The whole incident was like this. Perhaps, but my daughter was smart enough to realize that there was a baby monitor in the living room. As for my daughter, it probably felt like she was sneaking her boyfriend into the house, but I never thought it would come to this. First of all, the colleague, but this one was easily sent to the prison. My daughter is still unconscious and in a vegetative state. Ironically, her baby was carried away in the riot. My relationship with my husband is on the rocks. I have more hatred for my husband than I do for his co-worker. If my husband had not bullied his colleague, this tragedy would not have happened. In the first place, he was not even aware that he was bullying her. My husband, after all, had not changed at all since he was a 16-year-old delinquent. Now I regret having married him. No, I will not divorce him. Because my daughter's medical bills will still be high. I'm going to have him work as an ATM machine for me and my daughter for the rest of my life. I am still working part-time, but I have reached my mental limit and am now going to the hospital and taking medication. When I got pregnant with my daughter, I thought I was going to build a proper family. But where did I go wrong? I feel much better now that you have listened to me so far. I'm in such a state, but there is only one saving grace. The doctor told me that my daughter might wake up soon. To be honest, I have no idea what our family's future will be like when she wakes up. But I'm going to do my best. Thank you all for listening to my long story.